Hello and welcome back Level 6. This is a little bit of a video to show you around the BA Honours Degree Show 2018. This is going to be you in about a year's time or less than that, so this is an opportunity for us to show work, talk about the way that people have taken on this Level 6 programme, and also how they've displayed their work, how they presented it, etc. So, over to the crew. Kate, do you want to talk about maybe a piece of work, a body of work that you think has captured your eyes and heart? Or
I think, like every year, I think the show is amazing. Each year I think it's the best show ever, which I think is always good. I love the ambition that the students show and the quality of the final piece. I think for me, certainly I might touch upon a couple of pieces, but the pieces that resonate are the ones that have got a personal integrity to them, that they're pieces of work that the students have kind of documented their own lives or subjects that they're involved in or close to, because I think it's really good to see the students in the work as well as the kind of technical expertise. And for you, Rick?
I think, by the way, this is the first film I've made, so if I halter, don't worry. Yeah, I think the important thing for me is we're focusing on the work made here, and the exhibitions always show the final outcome. In actual fact, the best projects and the best work that we'll look at in this film have got lots and lots of supporting work behind it. It's not just the work on the wall that gets assessed, it's everything. And I think in some of the weaker projects, that's where it shows also. So it's it's great to look at the finished result, but I think it's also worth thinking about the supporting work that goes into it.
yeah, I'd agree. I mean, this is my first degree show here at Staffs, and I think the quality of final production is pretty amazing. And I've been to a lot of degree shows, so I think the standard of work is there as a marker for yourselves coming back, and the difference between this and maybe Novus, and Rick might go into that later on, is kind of important to move up to that next level of productivity. But I think as this year has developed, and whereas I've not taught much on the Level 6 this year, there are students who have come to see me as that other voice, and that might be Rick this year, that other voice that might not be teaching you all the way through Level 6, but to get another voice, another opinion on your work and your practice that's gone on. And I think that is really, really important. I think that can come down to just not only ideas and when you might be struggling with that, but also printing. People who have come to us and gone, I have printed something and it's 60 by 40 inches and I'm not sure that it's the right thing. Not thinking this is the end product and I bought a frame for it and this is going on the wall, but more, I want your ideas, I want your thoughts on this before I plough ahead and do this as a kind of bulk lot.
Yeah, because we say this every year, that the one challenge or the one frustration we have is with students that we don't see, that there will always be, for whatever reason, a couple of students who we don't get the opportunity to contribute, and I always find that really frustrating. And this year, perhaps more than any other year, the real thrill has been the fact that the three of us actually have got to see a lot of the work, particularly book layouts and kind of exhibition ideas in the planning stages, because then actually what comes out of those meetings can be perhaps more ambitious than was previously proposed.
Well, I think, yeah, if I could just add one more thing, ambition being the key word there. I've just said to Kate and Paul that the big difference between the good work and perhaps the not so good work for me is that the better work has clearly gone up into a different league from the Novus show. Whereas some of the projects here, they're good projects, but I could see them happily fitting into the second year show, and that's clearly not good enough. We're looking for a real hike in standards to complete professionalism and to learn from the mistakes made from Novus, or perhaps, and put them right here and really aim high. So that's what I'm looking for as we look around the show.
And I guess just to kind of like follow on from that, I think over this summer vacation we've given you a load of research exercises to be working on, one which includes visiting exhibitions, visiting degree shows. Now, The degree shows may have come down, but there are exhibitions up and down the country, and I think it's a really good practice for yourselves to be going out, having a look at work. There are times when I go to exhibitions where I'm disappointed by the photographs on the wall, but there's always things that you will pull away from that, whether it's the way that the work is framed, mounted, whether it's the blurb on the wall, the context behind the piece of work. Always you will find out things that are going to benefit your practice, and I think that is something that I would definitely kind of encourage during this year.
And following on from that, I think when you start to talk about your work, you're contextualising it, the more work you've seen, the more magazines you look at, the more books you read, the
Definitely.
easier it becomes to be really knowledgeable and convincing when you are framing your work, both in a written form in your evaluative report, but also when you're talking in front of your work and when you're going on into your career. So following on from that, it's really important, to look at stuff, talk to people about stuff and read stuff.
One more thing, anecdotally, we have sort of what we might call competitor universities, or rather universities that aren't too far from here, and anecdotally already heard that out of 4 of those, that this show is by far better than any of them. So that's really good news for Staffs University and for these graduates.
So shall we look at some work?
Let's do it.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'd like to talk about Max's body of work. I started at university in October, and I think from very early on I knew who Max was, and that's not because he was really loud, but he's very, very clear about who he was or who he is as an image maker, as a portrait photographer, as a fashion photographer. And why I've kind of like brought this piece of work to your attention is because, number one, it's a great body of work. It looks amazing on the wall, but also I would say that one of the things that I would always try and say to the students is to suck the university dry. And what I mean by that is to get your money's worth out of the course. And I think that no one could argue that Max has got his money's worth out of the course. And by that, he will tap you for information, whether you are a lecturer, whether it's a TI, he's always there asking for advice. And he's not precious about his work, and I don't mean that in a bad way. He will come to you with a print, he'll come to you with 15 prints of that size, with the idea that we are starting a discussion, starting a dialogue, not that these 15 prints are going to go on the wall. He will come to you and ask for advice about the way that they're printed, the tone of the print, the story, the narrative that goes with the body of work, with no kind of like desire that everything that is on the table is going to end up as part of his final piece of work. And that's why I think this body of work is so strong. Again, we talked previously about Ewan and about his desire to get out there and work with clients. Max is the same. Max is out, I think today or tomorrow in London, photographing the Sky pundits for a body of work. And that's the kind of make it happen type mentality that they've got. Very early on also in this project, I would say that, and in the year, Max put his work out to 2 key photographers, one of them of which was one of his heroes, to get feedback on his practice. That's a brave thing to do, and that photographer came back with criticism of things that Max was doing, but nothing that couldn't be changed, nothing that couldn't be rectified, and Max took that on board, and that's why he's getting these big gigs now. Okay, so one other consideration and a thing that has come up is presentation and how you print your work. I think one of the big finds this year might have come from the Novus show, where PVC prints have come into the fore. And what we've got behind here is these images here. The wedding photographs are printed onto photographic paper, and I know that the student is disappointed in the final quality of these images. And not only so much the quality, but how robust they are. And that's a really kind of like important thing when you're printing this size. How easy it is for your work to kink and to buckle and to crease, and how well it hangs and things like that. And this photographic paper at this size has really struggled to kind of like stop from having those problems where the PVC prints, they're heavier weight, they drop easily, and all the creases and any kind of like the rolls of them just fall out. So I think that end product is like really important. And just on that, on kind of like presentation, how you hang your work is really critical. We've had people hanging this kind of work with magnets. We've had people hanging the work with Velcro. One of the most cruel things that will ever happen is that you put your degree show up and you come back in the morning and your piece of work is on the floor. That has happened this year. So there are certain materials that we will try and recommend that you use to put on the back of your work. The finished product, the finished kind of like piece of work on the wall, and how you hang it is entirely up to you. But we will have recommendations for that. And we found one thing, that certain paints struggle. The adhesive on the back of some of the Velcro and the magnets has struggled with certain type of paints, and that's the sort of thing, as I said, that you try and kind of like resolve before putting this up on the wall.
Okay, one of the pieces of work that I've chosen to talk about are these three pictures here. The project is essentially about retouching. The student hopes to go on to a career in retouching. So there's quite a few things to talk about. One, I think, is quantity, because as you've already seen with some of the books that we've shown you, there's quite a lot of, some people shot hundreds and hundreds of pictures, all of which have been edited into a project. With this one, we end up with 3 pictures. That's okay, but I think, as we would have said with the Nova show, if you're going to make 3 pictures, we would expect a lot of stuff to have gone on into the production of those pictures. These 3 pictures here, I think, haven't made that step from level 5 to level 6. There's not a significant difference. These pictures could easily be on the corridor in the Nova show. In addition, they don't strike me as being fabulous examples of retouching. I think perhaps the subject matter was poorly chosen for that. And if I were being bad cop, which I never am, I would say that I think these could be shot in a week, if I'm honest. I think they could. And that's not good. So, yeah, I think that's all I've got to say about that.
So, as part of your final projects, quite a few students tend to produce magazines and books. Year on year, I think the online publishing companies have fine-tuned the game, and we wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the books that the students have produced this year, with both good practice and a few things to keep in mind. As every year, our main concern is time management. That there were a number of students who had intended to produce a book, but unfortunately hadn't allowed themselves enough time to turn it around. But we have a selection of some of the publications from this year, and we're going to talk individually a little bit about a couple of them. So this book, again, nice sized book. Some years we have very small books. We always think for a photographic book it's quite nice to have a book that you can handle but is big enough to see the quality of the image. And again, what's nice about this is we've had the title of the cover, typography, clearly considered in relationship to the image. So we've got no one round here goes to university or to uni. Like many students, we've got a lead-in page and then our introductory panel. This book particularly, the text, the written narrative, is very personal and very powerful and really does give the viewer an insight into the project and into the intention that the photographer wants to share, which is her life coming from London, moving to Stoke, and the physical and mental and professional journey that she takes over the course of the 3 years. Some of the images are descriptive, some perhaps more metaphorical. We've got our introductory text and then some factual information, sometimes beneath the image, which is quite nice. So you get a kind of linear narrative. So we start in East Town, and then all of these interesting spaces that the student revisits, but sometimes the personal narrative underneath gives an insight into what has happened into those locations. And so it's really nice, very simple layout. We've got image, quite often double page spreads, so playing off each other. If I had one slight concern, I think we could have had a little bit more space in the book, so an occasional gap. But what is really lovely is that the text really enhances the viewer's experience, so it works brilliantly as a written narrative. And again, what was nice is this student chose to present on the wall just 3 images. So there was one that documented the London location, one that perhaps metaphorically covered the transition between London, and then a final image for Stoke-on-Trent. And that, as a kind of 2-piece project, was really successful, but the main body of the work is in the book, and you will see as I flick slightly clumsily through that this, you can see, is where the student's emphasis is telling this journey through her progression. So this, I think, we would say was a very successful and very powerful book. So moving on to Rick.
I just kind of say also on the text, I think the text is there when it's needed. It's not on every page, it's there when it's needed and when it amplifies the story. So that's the kind of the crux of this. Yeah, moving on, I think cheekily, if you were fortunate enough to do the documentary module, you would have learned lots about image and text and layout and things like that. But I'm just picking up on this book, and the reason why I'm picking up this book is because, one, I think it's a beautiful piece of work, but also it's because the student in question decided that photography wasn't kind of like their future career, but actually instead of just getting through the degree, did a piece of work that was close to her own heart, and somebody who was going into the caring professions to do a piece of work on dementia and Alzheimer's. It was bang on theme, and I think it was brought up earlier, this idea of the photographer and their kind of like their passions, their desires, that personality of the photographer coming through the work is bang on for this piece here. So it's a piece of work called Madge and John, and the story behind this is that Madge used to look after John when he was a young lad, and now John looks after Madge because she's got dementia, and it's a story about that. Again, talking about the scale of book and size of book, good size book, A4 book, text. I think Rick always kind of like points to 12-point fonts.
11.
Just checking you're on there. But again, a simple kind of layout, some images that bleed to the edges, little bits of text in there in grey fonts that don't compete with the images. Differently to the book that we've seen, slightly different sizes of images that kind of like go through the book, so it breaks up the book as it goes through. But again, the pieces of text, like the previous book that we've been looking at, are there to amplify the story. We hear the voice of the citizen. I think that's what's really critical throughout this. And by the time you get to the end of this book, you feel that you know both Madge and John.
Yeah, fantastic book. I'd just like to take a look at this one. Probably, when I mentioned earlier that the amount of work that goes into some projects, I was thinking about this, because it's an absolutely fantastic book, particularly if you look at it that way on. Because it's a project on a motorcycle racing team. Essentially it's an editorial journalistic project, but also sports photography, and the layout is really terrific. Yes, Paul's right, I'm a little bit of a stickler for layout because it's very easy to get book wrong, I think. Sometimes if books go any smaller than this, I start to feel like I'm looking at some kind of children's learn to read book, whereas this is a professional kind of product, and there's just picture after picture. Look at this for layout, going straight across in a panoramic format there. We've had black and white images on the previous page. We've got mixed colour and black and white here. Really positive design. On top of that, really great photography skills. There's so many pictures in here that I take all afternoon going through it, but every picture in here is really well seen. All those skills that we picked up in the first year and the second year, they're all in here, which is great to see. I mean, it's no surprise that the guy who made this, in fact today, as we're speaking, is down in London on shooting a film. He's getting paid to shoot a film exactly the same as this, and you can see why. It's just top class. And yet, the work on the wall, there's only 3 prints, there's a very short film, and in actual fact, a few bits of motorbikes, so this is really where the work is. Absolutely fantastic.
Keeping on this kind of like theme though, of the idea of the photographer's personality coming through in their work.
Yeah.
This is Ewan, this is who he is.
Yeah.
It's not just a job that he's doing. The guy is into kind of BMX biking, road cycling, motorbikes. It's his passion, and why he's getting these jobs through this is because it's what he loves to do. He's one of that crowd, and he's trusted. He's an insider, so I think that's the kind of valuable thing for him. You know, Rick's just mentioned the shoot that he was doing today. Last week he was over in France for 2 days shooting. These guys trust him, and you know, as I said, he's part of that kind of like setup.
It's really taken off for him. I mean, again, difficult to see on camera perhaps, but yeah, I mean, this picture here is shot in Spain. He's been all over the country.
Can you zoom in?
You know.
And the other thing I found out from Ian the other day is actually to have these printed, he had 15 printed for £80, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah.
And so he's been able to use these as a sort of almost like a mobile portfolio.
Yeah.
So any serious clients, he's able to sort of, in a sense, share the wealth of the work he's done. And you can see, as we just flick through, that not only photographically are they really carefully seen, but the magazine itself.
Absolutely, and that is what I mean by making that step from the Nova show to this show. There's so much work gone into that that it speaks for itself as a product. Terrific.
So just for me to kind of like finish off on that, I think that if you are looking at making a book, looking at making a magazine, it might sound like the blatantly obvious kind of point to make, but you should be looking at books and magazines. You should be looking at layouts. You should be gathering these up, both good and bad, bringing them to tutorials, getting feedback on those things so that this thing becomes something beautiful and finished, not something that was a nearly. And that's what the degree show has got to be. It's got to be about something that you look at and go, it's polished, it's finished. That piece there is finished, as polished as you will get.
And that's a good point, Paul, because quite a few of the books on the table here, the 3 of us met up with the students throughout the module, particularly later on. Rather than the students sending them off without us seeing them, we had a really big input into a number of these projects that improved them tremendously. Some we didn't. I don't know. Kate, do you want to talk about?
I mean, this is an interesting concept. We have a student who was interested in producing perhaps a guide to a place, which is unusual. We haven't had that before. And quite a nice idea, actually, to produce like a tourist guide or a flyer to a place when you first visit. The challenge this particular student had was lacking the skills needed in the creative process, and by that I mean sort of in design or anything like that. So was sort of had to work in Word because that was the only format the student was familiar with. Again, working A4. So what we ended up with, unfortunately, was a sort of little pamphlet, but the typography, the layout and the content just didn't quite have its own identity. This almost could be what you would find for free at the back of the church hall.
Could I just, sorry to interrupt that. Sorry, I'm interrupting, but I'm just thinking, that's true, but all the time, throughout the semester too, that student could have easily spoken almost on a daily basis with the wonderful, the one and only Mark Hatton, to discussions about InDesign, what best software to lay this out, and as far as I'm aware, didn't do much of that at all.
I don't think at all. And so if you've got an idea for a project as a sound idea, make sure that you do absolutely get the input from experts in the field so that you can execute what you want to achieve to the greatest of the potential. Because I think this would be something, even for me, how the staples are put in becomes slightly problematic because our fold is not sort of straight, and it's those little differences that I think can make a difference to how plausible something is, how professional it is.
There will be exceptional guides out there, exceptional guides that are beautiful pieces of work to take away. Not and the whole point of it should be, we should pick that up and go, I would like to go to Penkridge. That's the whole point. And that's what this piece of work should be about. And I think for that, you would, like we would say about these magazines, books, you would get together, loads and loads of kind of guides to find the best one to work with.
And just as kind of, since we've got a couple more on the table, I'm just going to flick through them for you guys to see. Again, this is kind of like a fashion portfolio, and as I flick through, what you can see is quite nice is the student has really used colour in order to sort of differentiate between the bodies of work. So something that simple really changes this to looking.
Great pictures as well.
Great pictures, of course, but it's just those little touches. And again, both these last two books on the table have students with personal connections to the locations. So yet again, we come back to that idea is to choose projects that you have an investment in, that you care about. So again, it's easy to sort of, you'll see that I think Rick's 11 point on the whole filtered through to the books this year, and on the whole, font size has been used very effectively. And again, when design is kept really simple, it works.
Yeah, I mean most of the manufacturers, such as Blurb or Bob's Books, they all have their own template. So it's not actually rocket science to produce a good book if you keep it simple. I think probably the title here could have been improved, a little bit clunky. That can be sorted out by the three of us looking at the book and having a discussion with you and helping you along the way, instead of bringing something to us as a fait accompli and we say, you could have improved this, you could have improved that. That dialogue is really important.
Totally agree with it. I kind of even think like, producing my own books, there's times where I've picked up a book and absolutely love it for different things. It could be the layout, it could be the text that's in that book, and you bring parts of that to your own practice, even though your subject matter could be entirely different. You bring those bits. There's times where I've looked at things and gone, graphic design wise, text wise, I absolutely love it, but it's wrong for this book. That's what we want to bring to the table. Those are the discussions that we want to have to make it more finished.
And one last comment on books. The place to look is not far away, it's just over the road, because we've got absolutely hundreds of, I was about to swear there, absolutely brilliant photography books that have been designed by graphic designers, and you can use those as templates. So rather than necessarily using the Blurb templates, go and look at the book in the library, pick one out and think, yeah, I'd like my book to look and feel like this. And then it's quite a straightforward task of speaking to Mark, who's currently behind the camera, and speaking to us, and putting something together that looks as good as this, rather than...
And the other thing is to remember that you can collaborate with books. People often forget that, but you can actually commission somebody to write the foreword. You can work with the graphic designers to do the layout. You know, that the photographers don't in industry work in isolation.
Absolutely.
So we don't, in a sense, I think students can be a bit nervous about that, but we actively encourage that kind of practice, because you want to gain those skills of liaising with other individuals. I'm going to talk to you again just about a couple of pieces of work. I've selected this piece to start with. As you can see, if Mark can just span, that we've got a set of pictures that are investigating kind of stereotypical representation of motherhood, that this is a student who had become a mother as part of the course or during the course, and she was really interested in kind of documenting what it was really like as opposed to the fictitious narrative we see everywhere. What I think is hugely successful in this work is the use of daylight. Now, we often undervalue daylight, and you can see that within the print tonality and the print quality that the skin tones have kept their luminosity, but we've got the look of the sort of Caravaggio lighting. So this is a student who has been researching, been shooting, been hugely influenced by other female practitioners who've documented motherhood. She was particularly drawn to the work of Eleanor Carucci, who also documents in this similar way with that use of light. And so whilst we may only have a small number of images on the wall, in order to get that successful lighting, you have to shoot an awful lot of work. The other thing the student had to really consider is how to frame and present the work, because we've got a challenge onto the conventions of stereotypical motherhood. So the last thing in the world the student would do is then frame it up as to be, you know, beautiful pictures of my children. So this is very much why we've ended up with a pinned piece rather than a framed piece, which is very, very different to students who are trying to kind of cut costs at the last minute and say, well, I'll just pin it up. And we would say, why would we be pinning? And here there is a justifiable reason that it would be inappropriate to frame. So all we would say is don't think about purely cost, but think conceptually what is appropriate for the piece of work. And I don't know, without asking Mark, I'm going to have to ask him, were these printed in-house? So again, I would say that if we've got skin tonality or particular luminosity or particular delicacies in the print, if we work in-house, we work with our fabulous team, we keep that control. Which I do think when we're working with this type of work is really important. So this, I think, is a great example, and I'm going to spin Mark round, and we'll talk about one last piece, which is an ethical piece. I'm always encouraged when students have an issue they want to explore, and I think the environment perhaps is one of the most topical issues we're facing at the moment, with the blue planet and the idea of kind of plastic pollution decimating our existence, very pertinent. I would have to be honest and say the students struggled photographically, because actually what seems like a simple idea, documenting waste or rubbish, photographically is really challenging, because you can go to the skip or you can go to a tip, but can you make interesting pictures about it? And I'm going to say this student did manage to come up with a solution, which was to use image and text and statistical data, and it did come across as a plausible campaign. But for me, perhaps photographically, not fully resolved, because I think in order to do a conceptual campaign justice, the idea of how to shoot is really important. So whilst I think it does give the message, I think just to result in 4 pictures, perhaps slightly obvious in what they have depicted, and I would have perhaps liked a sort of more sophisticated visual. And I don't know if you guys have seen, but I've just seen on the front of National Geographic magazine, there's a most amazing picture of what appears on first sight to be an iceberg, but it is in fact a carrier bag floating in the sea, so that you get the kind of ice cap protruding from the sea, but actually as a visual you can see that it's a plastic bag. And it's those sorts of sophisticated elements that actually is a tall order for a student, but I still think we aim high and we try things out. So I think we've had a pretty good go at showcasing some of the work. Mark is going to add some detailed shots, but good luck, guys, and I think it's all to play for, and I really look forward to seeing what this year, which will be 2019, brings, and if we can even eclipse this fantastic show. So good luck.